Welcome to Shaped by Faith with your host, Theresa Rowe. To find out more about Shaped by Faith and Theresa Rowe, please visit shapedbyfaith.com or visit the YouTube channel, Facebook, or Instagram. And now, here is Theresa Rowe.
Welcome to Shaped by Faith. I'm your host, Theresa Rowe. So today on Shaped by Faith, I'm delighted to welcome back my friend, returning guest, Sharon Wilharm. Sharon is a Christian speaker, a Bible teacher, and author with a lifelong fascination and joy of women of the Bible. She just brings them to life. Sharon, I just love the way you do that in your writing and when you're speaking. Sharon's the host of the All God's Women podcast, and it's a syndicated radio show where she shares her powerful and most many overlooked stories of women in the scripture. I love that too, Sharon. I've really gleaned a lot of wisdom from you through the years, just reading your posts and listening to you. And I'm just so grateful that you said yes to God.
Well, thank you. I love the obscure women. They are my favorites. The one that everyone's like, how have I never seen that in the Bible before? And, like those are the ones that to me really speak to me and seem to speak to other women.
Absolutely. Well, Sharon, for those who haven't met you before through my radio show or podcast, and they're meeting you for the first time, can you just share a little bit about your background before you started writing and getting into what you're doing right now?
Okay, well, I think I always wanted to write, but then when I was in high school, I had a teacher in English who basically thought we should all write like John Steinbeck, really intellectually, and I wanted to write like Irma Bombeck, and there was just a clash, and I thought, well, maybe this isn't gonna, happen. I did do journalism for a while, writing for a column for a newspaper. I've written homeschool curriculum, so I've kind of been writing like all my life, but God just keeps directing me in different ways. My husband and I made movies for 10 years. That's something he went to school for, and then decided he didn't have the personality because he's very much an introvert. And so, I'm obviously not. I wrote and directed. He did the tech stuff, and it worked out well. It wasn't what I thought that God was going to have me do. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, but it was what God called me to do. And I learned a lot from it. But doing the Women of the Bible, the podcasting, the blogging, and now moving on to other types of writing, this is what I enjoy doing. This is what God has called me.
And I bet it's a stress reliever for you, Sharon, to write.
It is. It's funny because like nonfiction just comes so naturally to me. I don't even think about it. Fiction is what I really love. I don't think it comes as naturally to me. I have to work harder at it, but I do enjoy that. Writing about the women of the Bible kind of combines both of them, because I'm taking that nonfiction, but I get to use storytelling. And so I think that's what really established me feeling like maybe I could write fiction because I enjoy telling the stories of these ladies. And I have just loved it so much.
So where did your interest come from writing about the women in the Bible? I mean, you could have wrote about anything in the Bible, and you chose the women of the Bible.
Well, it's funny. In 2019, I took on women's ministry at our church, which is pretty funny because I wasn't one that really participated in women's ministry. Like, I'm not one of those, like, I don't know. That was for other people, not really my thing, but there was a need and I did it. And then I was like, well, if I'm doing women's ministry, I should probably do a Bible study, but I didn't feel qualified in any way. So I was like, I'll just invite ladies over and we'll have a meal because I can do a meal. I can do that. And we'll just talk about the Proverbs 31 woman. And so I would just break it down, like, a little passage, like the, one or two verses. And I would tell a woman in the Bible that kind of possessed those qualities. And so we did that for quite a long time. And then when, about the time that COVID hit, my life was about to take a twist because my daughter and son-in-law, who had lived right down the street from us for a couple of years, she was pregnant. They were about to have a baby. And then he was called to a church. He's a pastor, 5.5 hours away. And
Oh.
so I'm like, oh dear, she's having a baby. I won't be around her. I've got to keep busy. So I decided I was going to do a podcast. I didn't want to interview people because I had done that on my blog for a long time. I wanted something different. I'm like, what can I talk about? I was like, women of the Bible is the only thing that I could think of that I could talk about. So that's what I did.
So, did anything surprise you, Sharon, when you started studying these women? Did
Oh,
anything stand out to you, or do you have a particular woman of the Bible that stood out to you?
well, I think what stood out to me was that in the beginning, I was like just using other people's. Like I was only doing where I had books and stuff where it was telling me, the same women that we've all studied. I would read what other people said about it. And then I was joining a podcast conglomerate, where it was a bunch of podcasters
Mhm.
together, of Christian podcasters. And the guy was interviewing me. He said, well, the only thing that concerns me is what happens when you run out of women. And I hadn't thought of that. And so I'm like, I'm going to have to go to some more women. I'm going to have to do actual Bible research on my own. And, that sounds pretty simple, but it was kind of revolutionary where I'm like, I have to just read this and, read commentary. And it was a life changer for me because I began seeing scripture in a completely different light.
Well, Sharon, some of the women that you share, we have never heard of. I guess we've read their story. Maybe they didn't have a name, maybe they weren't named, but we just kind of blipped over it and didn't think about it. So, as you're writing and telling their story, how did you just glean that wisdom from the word? I know some of them were just given a few sentences in the Bible. Did God give you that insight and revelation as you're writing?
I guess he would have to, like pretty much I would just read and I would think, like my thought is everything is in the Bible for a reason.
Hmm.
So why did God put this particular woman? Why did he name her? Why didn't he name her? Why did he include this story?
Yeah.
And so then I was like, well, what can I learn from this? What can other women learn from this? He had to put it there for us to learn from it. What are we supposed to be getting out of it? And so that's how I began reading it.
What are some of the encouraging responses that you've received from readers or listeners? Because you have a syndicated radio show, and so I'm sure a lot of people heard that.
Yes, I think I get the most like responses and stuff from people who are searching a particular woman in the Bible, usually somebody that, is obscure, so they run across me. But I get a lot from people in other countries, and that's really cool. I've had a lot of women, I have a lot in like Nigeria, South Africa, India, some of the European countries. But what's so cool is they'll say, like, I've been so encouraged by what you're doing. I'm starting a Bible study at my home or at my church, and I'm going to do the same thing that you're doing. And I think that's just the most amazing thing because when I was growing up, I always felt like maybe God was going to call me to be a missionary. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do whatever you want, God. I just don't want to go to Africa or somewhere like that. I had no desire to travel. And I thought, for sure God was going to call me to go to Africa. you know, when I was in college, I actually applied to be an international missionary and God closed that door, probably because
Wow.
he said, I don't need you there. But it's kind of cool because I see now he gave me that desire, but it's like you're not going to personally go, but your voice, your stories, your ministry is going to go there. And so I think that's just really cool.
It absolutely is. I know I've reached out to you several times over the years and asked you about different women, and I've learned personally myself so much from what you've researched, Sharon, and what you've put down on paper and what you speak about. So I just want to thank you so much. Through the years, I'm sure you see what you have done and where God has placed you in the different seasons that have changed. I'm sure you have seen a shift and a change. um, you've kind of rolled with it, haven't you? I mean, you've just kind of, okay, Lord, what's next?
Well, yeah, because I started off just doing the podcast and my blog, and they were usually like about 10 to 12, 10 to 15 minutes, because I would just concentrate. And then I decided to, I don't know, it's like God put all these people in my life that with radio. And so then I started asking questions and I discovered there was a need for like 2-minute shows. And I was like, could I take what I've done and turn it into a radio show? And I did. So then I started looking at, I could do more women because I didn't have to have as much information about them. I could do a shorter story. I could expand some of them. And then I had approached Moody, and when Moody said, took it on, they wanted a daily. And so then it's like, okay, I have to try 2 minutes every day. And so then when that ended, then they've been carrying it for another 2 or 3 years now, which is
Wow.
pretty wild.
That's a God amazing story. And you had to say yes.
Yeah.
You were out there searching and what's next, Lord? That's so amazing. Where are you right now?
I am in a small town north of Nashville. We live in a little historic town, Springfield.
And you are outside if you're
I
watching
am in our
the podcast.
backyard, yes, in a
Beautiful.
historic district.
I love it. So Sharon's the host of All God's Women podcast, syndicated radio show where she shares powerful stories of many times overlooked women in the Bible. And she's an author, and you've made movies, and you've been on Moody Radio, and God has just brought you to a different season now, Sharon. I understand that, you're stepping into a brand new direction. You talked about a little bit in the first segment about your fiction writing. So tell us how that came about and what excites you about that.
Well, I have always wanted to be a fiction writer, and God kept saying, not yet, not yet, not yet. It's not time. And then after we released our last movie, and then I ran out of women in the Bible, I'm like, God, I've covered them all. And then it was like, okay, now you can do this. And so I wasn't sure what I was going to write. And I wrote a book and I was really excited about it. It's called The Amazing Crab Alley Revival. And it takes place in the late 1800s in a small town in Florida, which is based on a town where my grandparents lived when I was growing up. And so I wrote this whole story about basically a dying church and an older woman who realizes that she's going to die and she's going to have nothing to show for it.
Mm.
And so a series of events that with her and two other women and a dog and a little boy, and we end up having revival in this small town that kind of catches everybody by surprise. And so I was really excited about it. I submitted it to a couple of agents. One of them who, is a big time, my like dream agent. She turned it down, but she said it was delightful and quaint and wonderful characters, but it was too churchy. And so
Oh,
like, well, this is for the Christian market. So I just set it aside and it's like, okay, there'll come a time. And
yeah.
then about that same time, God started opening up, like introducing me to Love Inspired with Harlequin.
Mhm.
And I had never wasn't really familiar with it. And but they have this whole line of inspirational romance by Harlequin. And they all have to have a faith element. They're all, very clean. They're struggling with spiritual things. And I just kept saying, God, you can't be taking me from Bible study to writing romance. Like that can't be, that's just crazy. But he kept, doing things. So, he put me, the most amazing thing is like, I started reading a lot of the love inspired books. One of them's by Lenore Worth, and she lives in Florida in the same town that we used to live in. And as I would read, I would just think, she seems like somebody I would be friends with.
Mm.
And one day I just prayed, God, maybe someday could we meet? And I've never done that before. It was like the craziest thing. Well, a few months later, I signed up for a mastermind group with Christian authors, and I'm in the same group as her.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, if I wanted encouragement, and the other three in the group are all love inspired authors.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
I'm like, okay, God, I guess. But I also wrote a book for Love Inspired, and they had a blitz. I am in round 2, but we're still waiting to hear back whether they like it. In the meantime, while I'm waiting, I was like, I'm going to get out this book I wrote and I set aside. I sent it to the same publisher that did my Bible study, and I immediately got a response and said, I like it. And so now I'm working on that. It'll come out sometime next spring. And I'm just really excited about it. And they didn't consider it too churchy.
That's good. So, Sharon, I'm sure you have to write a lot of dialogue. in this book? Did that come easy to you? Because that's hard.
You know what's so funny? When we were making movies, our first movies, the critics, it was always like, complaining about the cheesy dialogue. So
Oh,
we literally made two silent movies with no dialogue because that was our way to get away from it. So I learned to tell a story without any dialogue.
mm,
And then when we did our last dialogue, by that point, I had learned to tell a story without it. So my dialogue was very minimalistic.
mm.
It's funny now, every review of my fiction writing, they always put the dialogue as my strength, which
Oh,
is
wow.
just a God thing because I was the queen of cheesy dialogue.
So, how has writing fiction stretched or maybe surprised you compared to your nonfiction work?
What is so cool to me is that I think that fiction reaches people in a way. I mean, Jesus was a storyteller. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, he told stories. And so I'm really excited. I think, I can put spiritual truths in a fictional story and people will absorb it in a different way. I
Hmm.
feel like with this book, I mean, it is very powerful. There's a lot of humor, but it's one to make you think. Hopefully, it'll make people evaluate their lives. And it's still, I can't get away from Women of the Bible. It is a Southern historical interpretation of the story of Lydia.
Oh,
So
wow.
the different plot points go along with Lydia in the Bible.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you, your main characters, how you came up with that, or if it's people you've experienced in life or people you know. I know that when authors write fiction, they can use people in their lives, even themselves, and put them in a character.
Yeah, I feel I don't necessarily base them on people I know, but
Hmm.
more like situations that I know. Like the church world is something that I know intimately. I've spent so much time. My best friend from high school, my daughter, are married to pastors. I know the struggles that they go through. I've seen a lot of behind the scenes things.
Mm.
So I like to incorporate that. Each of my characters, I think, has a little bit of me. In this book, one of the characters I had a real struggle with trying to get into her head, but I finally was able to relate her to a friend of mine and think, well, how would Judy act? What would she do in this situation? And that really helped me a lot. The character herself isn't her, but how she responds a lot of times is how she would.
Sure. What has God been teaching you in this new season?
Definitely humility. Like it is very humbling to write fiction. I think a lot of it because it doesn't come naturally. I have to work at it,
Hmm.
but I find it very rewarding. I love to escape into, a fictional world. It's kind of cool because you can control what people do. For the book that Love Inspired is considering, I'm really excited about it because it's about an older woman that has never been married and she's about to turn 60, but part of it is because of choices. So she's reunited with her high school sweetheart. Now he's a widow with a big family, and I have a lot of friends that have just never married for various reasons, and
Hmm.
so I kind of consider it a tribute to them, that we're never too old to find true love.
Amen to that. So, how do you see fiction writing as a continuation of ministry? Because it's what you're doing, Sharon. Your whole life has been built upon the rock, about saying yes to the Lord and just following his steps that he has for you. And that's to be faithful like that, Sharon says a lot. It really does. To continue moving. And I love that it's creative. That's got to be a lot of fun.
It is. I mean, sometimes I get scared thinking, I mean, there's been so many times, God, are you sure I'm supposed to be going for a Bible study into this? Like, are you sure? But I just feel like in today's day and time, people need happily ever afters and they need fiction.
Mm. I love fiction. Do you have, like, I'm looking for there's lots of books, Sharon, but do you have a favorite book right now that you've recently read that you could share?
I just read, well, I've read several, but one that's really fun if you're looking for a lighthearted, really fun. Pepper Bosham has a new book out called Sense and Suitability. And so it's a play on, a classic. And she has such a sweet command of the language. And I've met her in person. She's so delightful. And so I would recommend that if you're just wanting something fun with a spiritual element.
So, Sharon, the name of the book that's coming out, is it coming out in 2026?
It is in spring of 2026.
Okay, and the name of it?
The Amazing Crab Alley Revival.
Where did you get that name? That's what I meant to ask you.
Well, so growing up on the Florida coast, one thing that I think most people don't realize is that, like, back in the day, the poor people lived on the water. Like the rich people didn't live directly on the water, like now, where everyone wants a waterfront house. So in this town, all the poor people live on Crab Alley, and it's named that because the crabs and all the fish. And so one of the characters is an immigrant single mom whose husband just kind of dropped her there. He moved them there, and now she's stuck. And so the revival takes place among the people that don't really fit in with the church proper. It's kind of the poor, the immigrants, and all that. And so that's where it comes from.
I love that. Let's talk about writers' conferences. I know how important they are, and I know I should attend them. So, tell us about writers' conferences and why someone should attend and what you get out of them.
Well, like for me, I met this wonderful friend who has this great podcast and radio show. You just never know who you're going to meet. And I think in a lot of ways, that is one of the great things about writers conferences is just meeting other people, all different stages of their career, maybe doing different types of writing, but God just kind of connects. And I think every writers conference that I've ever been to, you just connect with somebody that y'all each needed each other at that moment. Of course, I love classes. I like to learn. I always liked school when I was, growing up. I learned something from each one, but I think a lot of times the takeaway is just the community, the feeling like you're not alone. When I go to a writers conference, it's like I'm with my people. I connect with these people. These people are like me.
That's so good. Yeah, I loved meeting you, and it was a good time. I was a little intimidated because I'm like, I don't know what to do here. I just had some thoughts and ideas for another book, and I had no clue what to do. But you're right. It was a community. It was a community of like-minded people coming together. So if someone, let's say they've written a script, Sharon, or they have, they wrote a book. What are some of the conferences? I know we're towards the end of 2025 right now. Is there any conferences coming up this year or next year that you know of that you might want to give a shout out to?
Well, I'm going to one next week, the Kentucky Christian Writers Conference, which is, where we met. I'm looking forward to it. I don't think it's too late to register.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I think you can register, pretty late. I know that if you write novels, there's coming up, Lynette Eason is having a novel writing retreat that is in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and that's coming up in a few weeks. I think a lot of them have, ended for the year. That may be near the end. In January, I think it is, or February, there's the Asheville Christian Writers Conference. I went to that last year, really enjoyed that. The Blue Ridge Writers Conference is a big one, and it's a mix. It takes place at Ridgecrest in North Carolina, which is just a lovely place to meet. And it's like all different writers. You're going to have nonfiction and fiction and screenwriters and poets and people who write speculative and fantasy and just the works. But everyone comes together. I always feel like I've gone to a revival when I go to that. I just feel so uplifted, by it. I went to the American Christian Fiction Writers earlier, I guess last month, and I really enjoyed that. I had been in the past, and I was like you. When I went, I did not have a book. I just had an idea, And, I felt very intimidated, but just really gained from it. And the funniest thing is that was in 2018. So this year I go to, this conference, and as I'm checking into the hotel, this woman comes up to me and she's like, "Sharon, we met in 2018." And I'm like, "Seriously?" But we had both she taught screenwriting,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was a filmmaker, and so we kind of connected there. And I'm like, that is so cool, that God just connected us in that way. So you just never know. My daughter went with me to the American Christian Fiction Writers, have never written a book before, didn't really have, she just had an idea, but she wanted us to have a road trip. So we went, and it was the most amazing experience for her. It was literally life-changing for her, because now she's like, she's all on fire to write a book. So
And there's publishers there as well, right,
yes.
Sharon?
Yeah, you can pitch, and you don't have to, like some of them, they're like, they want you to have something already ready to go. But a lot of them, you can just sit there and talk to them. Like that's what I did the first time is I met with an agent. I said, all I've got is an idea. She's like, tell me about it. And, just kind of brainstorming. People are there because they want to connect. And
Mhm.
so people aren't going to be looking down at you. They're going to be encouraging you.
That's good. Would you share a word of encouragement for women who are listening, Sharon, who may feel God calling them into something new?
Definitely go for it. That's one thing I have learned, from all that I've done, is it is always worth the risk to take it and just do whatever God calls, because you do not want to live your life with regrets of, I wish I had done this. You're going to fail sometimes, and that's okay, because a lot of times the failures even, lead to the next step, and it's totally worth it to take those risks.
I love that. Sharon, thank you so much. And thank you for endorsing my book. I really
Glad
appreciate
to.
that. Yay. Thank you for listening. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Shaped by Faith with Theresa Rowe. Remember to visit shapebyfaith.com to find out more about workouts, the TV show, podcasts, blogs, Shaped by Faith products, and much more.